There's a myth that some people are born leaders, but if that were true, we wouldn't have many of the great leaders we have today, and it would prevent you from becoming the leader you want to be. You see, leadership isn't about vision, it's about showing up in everyday moments if you want to shape great teams, strong cultures, and real results. From charisma to communication, leadership is a learned set of skills. And while some might start with an edge, everyone can improve and get better. Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they are always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people over the past 3 decades. Today's guest is Dr. Scott J. Allen. He's an award-winning educator, keynote speaker, he has got a great podcast, and he's a leadership expert.
So influence is at the heart of the work. And can I create a setting in a situation where the 7 people around the table truly feel committed, not just complying? I don't want just bodies at the table, but they truly feel committed to the path that we're moving in. They're excited about the path we're moving in.
Today, Dr. Allen and I will be discussing the science behind being a charismatic leader, the difference between authority and influence, and why influence wins every time. Some people believe that leaders are born. I like to say that leaders are constantly in the making, but what does the research actually show us in regard to leadership?
So first of all, the science on something like charisma, for instance, all the research suggests you can elevate someone's level of charisma. We can put you in a classroom. We can give you some of the standards of what someone with charisma kind of embodies. Maybe it's their sense of humor, etc. And then we could put you in an improv class. We could elevate your comedic timing. There's all kinds of things that we could do to help better prepare you to show up in a meeting as more charismatic. Maybe it's the eye contact, how you communicate, sense of humor, all those different elements. Those can be learned and developed for sure. Now, I might not be like Will Ferrell after the training. I'm not going to maybe be on that level, but can we move the needle? 100%. So that's like one tiny subset of leadership. And then now we can go on to any number of other conversations around problem solving. Can we improve your abilities and skills around problem solving? Yes. Negotiation, 100%. Listening, communication skills, yes. Nonverbal communication, of course. So I think for me, we can improve your abilities, your knowledge, your skill in any of those areas. Now, will they become this super strength that you have? Maybe not, but can we improve? 100%. So that's one way of answering the question. Another way of answering the question is some of the research around, people who like self-select into leadership positions. And this research was done on twins. Like they determined that 70% is learned or environment, 30% is genetic. So what does that mean? So that means something like, let's go extroversion. Now, if I prefer extroversion, if I literally get energy by being around people all day long and engaging with people and ideating with people, well, it might be a little bit easier for me to step into a leadership position just because that's energizing to me all day long. Or if I genetically need a little less sleep, like stamina, I can go 16-hour days and I'm actually with people all day long and that's energizing. That might give me a little bit of an edge. Now, does that mean that people who prefer introversion or have lower levels of stamina can't be leaders at the highest levels? No, they totally can. They might have to develop some hacks. They might have to have some other superpower that elevates them. Maybe it's their knowledge, their IQ. Maybe it's their expertise. It's highly relevant. But you know what? Can we learn, develop, and grow? Can our skills improve? 100% yes. So it's a great question out of the gates because I think a lot of times people, they think, well, he just has it or she just has it. When in fact, yeah, some people might start out of the gates, but that doesn't mean that you can't develop yourself in a way to give you an edge, so to speak, right?
I agree with you, right? That leadership can definitely be developed over time. And you mentioned that there's some hacks or whatever. What are some hacks or habits that you see that people who have developed into great leaders over time take advantage of?
I was with a group of leaders of labs, so scientists, right?
Hmm.
These are individuals who are leading laboratories. They're incredible scientists in their own right, but they've never really sat in a program around leadership. So fascinating, right? I mean, they're in a leadership position, a position of authority, but they've never actually been trained in that work. So one literally this morning we were talking about leadership styles, and I oftentimes there's a great article from the Harvard Business Review. It was called Leadership That Gets Results. So just listeners Google Leadership That Gets Results Harvard Business Review, you'll come up with this article. And he uses this beautiful metaphor, Dan Goleman, of kind of golf. And it's about leadership styles, and he equates these different leadership styles to golf clubs. So there's an appropriate club for where you are on the hole. We don't tee off with our putter. We don't putt with our driver. Are we using the right club for the situation? And then using that with some level of excellence, right? Like playing that club with some level of excellence. But bottom line, there's 6 or 7 styles that some of the time it's really appropriate to be participatory. Some of the time it's really appropriate to be a little more directive. It's kind of like parenting. Sometimes you got to be more directive. Sometimes, hey, what movie do you want to watch, guys? What do you want to have for dinner? Totally appropriate some of the time. Sometimes we need to slow down and be a little bit more coaching. Sometimes we might need to share our vision and be a little bit more kind of authoritative with the direction we think we need to go. So all of these are appropriate some of the time, but not always. It's like a great coach. I know you played baseball. Sometimes as a coach, it's appropriate to be a little more directive. Sometimes it's appropriate to be affiliative or just like really let the team know you're proud of them. Sometimes you need to kind of be a little more pace setting and push and drive the team a little bit more. But you don't want to default into any one of these styles. So this lab leader is like, okay, how do I remember to practice this? So we talked about some of those hacks. We were like, okay, you could put a Post-it note on your computer that says leadership styles. You could have some type of partner who's going to hold you accountable, and you're going to go grab a beer once a month, and you're going to talk about these leadership styles. Maybe your hack is that when you are sitting in meetings for the first month, we're going to go James Clear or BJ Fogg from your neck of the woods right now, Tiny Habits or
Yep.
Atomic Habits. You and I need to write little baby subatomic habits and we will become millionaires. Maybe it's just that for the first month, you're going to not do anything other than just sit and watch these styles play out in meetings and pay like literally you can't fail, because for the first month, the only thing you're doing is you have this handout in your folder, in your bag. You're going to pull it out at meetings and you're just going to watch kind of the adventures ensue as you're sitting in meetings. Whatever that hack is for you, it doesn't matter. It's what works. I gave them a little touchstone. We did an activity with dice this morning. So I gave them a little touchstone. I said, put that on your desk. And when you're not getting the results you want, look at that dice and, what maybe could I be doing differently as a leader? What styles could I be employing? So those are all examples of hacks. Maybe you have a coach and that coach knows that this is something you want to work on, something you want to develop. And so you speak with your coach about it. I have a mentor. I go on a walk every 2 weeks. I speak with my mentor. Maybe that's your hack. So whatever it is for you, kind of doesn't matter. I showed them an example this morning. I wanted to be better about reaching out to my nephew and my aunt. So every 2 weeks on my to-do list, it pops up. Reach out to Hunter, reach out to Sherry. That's a hack. So I think for me, that's how I think about this stuff. And, maybe you have some that you use as well that have kind of helped you change behavior. It's a fun conversation, right? Because you do training. Part of the biggest challenge is that transfer of training. We've talked about this. Now, how does it actually change your behavior back on the job?
Training is great, but if it doesn't become sticky or there's no retention, it's kind of worthless, And so one of the hacks, I read a lot of books. I love reading books. And one of the hacks I have is that when I'm reading a business book or even a biography, I try to put in my thought process, well, how can I apply this to what I'm doing at work,
Yep.
and as something like there. Um, But I want to stay with leadership styles for a second. We had I had this great guest. You got to get him on the show, on your show. His name's Ethan Evans,
Okay.
big time guy from Amazon. But he talks about a chameleon leadership and adapting to whoever you're working with, as your leadership style. How important to be able to do that is self-awareness, right? Because you got to be able to look and adjust.
Well, self-awareness in leader development is foundational. Do you have some I was in a session the other day and it was beautiful. This gentleman, he ran a car dealership. He said, "Look, sometimes I can get a little bit hot. Sometimes I don't do my best, and sometimes I have to go circle back and say I'm sorry for how I behaved in that meeting. And I'm not perfect, but I know that's something I need to work on, and I know that's something that I can get triggered sometimes and not show up how I want to." I'm like, okay, you got half the battle kind of like taken care of right there, right? Because there's a level of self-awareness that at times he's failing, he's not at his best, but he knows that that can happen for him. And for me, as long as he kind of sticks with that and stays in the game and tries to show up a little bit differently next time or becomes more aware of his triggers, that self-awareness it's awesome. Because you know what it feels like. Maybe you had a coach somewhere along the way where they had no clue how they were showing up to others. And it's toxic, it's damaging. And then we wonder why people are coming to work and they're disengaged, or 2/3 of Americans are disengaged, actively disengaged at work, according to Gallup. Well, we're putting people who are not self-aware, maybe don't even know that they need to be self-aware, in positions of authority, and it's just not sustainable. It's not sustainable at all. So self-awareness for me, yes, bottom line, like kind of there with character, like you need that as a foundation to be sustainable as a leader. Another one of those just above that is going to be, are you really skilled at building relationships? Right in that sweet zone also is, are you a learner? Another one of those is, are you self-aware? Those are some good places to start when it comes to a conversation of, well, what makes a great leader? Okay, you have a person of character, they're a learner, they're interested and are self-aware about what they need to learn, what their foibles, they're willing to be a little bit vulnerable. Those are three probably, and they can build relationships. Those are probably some good places to begin. They're not everything, but they're good starting points. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Self-awareness, having character, which to me means having integrity, saying what
Yeah.
you say something that you're actually going to do it. Don't overpromise and underproduce, and then being a learner. I mean, that's right in my wheel zone as far as what I really believe. But I see all the time. I had a conversation with a gentleman yesterday who I kind of looks to me as a mentor, and in this conversation, it's just really obvious that he's just not self-aware of what's going on around him, and I try to be direct with the feedback and tell him, but for somebody like that, I mean, is that something that you can learn, to become more self-aware, or do you think that that's just like this particular gentleman, high performer, but I think would really struggles working with others because he just can't reflect enough to see what other people think about him,
Hmm.
or maybe doesn't care.
Well, okay. So I think a few things come to mind when it comes to human beings and behavior change. Um, yeah, is there a motivation to learn? Is there a motivation? Has there been some impetus for him to be curious about this? Maybe he didn't get the promotion. Maybe he has the promotion but is struggling to build a team. Whatever it is there a motivation to learn? Is there a readiness? It's in the literature. It's called a readiness to learn. So is there motivation, and are you actually ready to hear it? And sometimes people are not ready, and sometimes people are not motivated. It's going to take, maybe it's a disorienting dilemma, like, oh, I didn't get the job, I didn't get the promotion, or I got some feedback and it's totally jarring to me because it's very different than my self-concept. So I think those are two really important pieces of the puzzle. Do you have a manager or a coach who's giving you this unfiltered feedback and reinforcing the need to make this a priority? But if you have an individual who doesn't care how they're showing up to others, or isn't interested in, and just, it's called self-serving bias. I can much more easily see the foibles in you than I can see in myself, right? I
Know-it-alls.
I will blame whole generations. Gen Zs, they suck. I can't stand Gen Zs, and it was millennials before that. Oh, millennials are terrible. Well, the culture you're setting up here is actually terrible.
Mhm.
And what are you kind of contributing to the dysfunction here as a leader? And um, it's very difficult for us to look within and see what we're contributing to the dysfunction. It's much more easy for us to externalize that. We accept the wins. We kind of take those in pretty readily, but we struggle to own the losses and the failures. And that's another reason self-awareness is so important, because we are super good at playing mental gymnastics with our mind, and we suffer from like 180 cognitive biases, each one of us. So we have to be curious when we're not getting the results we want. So if this person lacks curiosity, if they're not interested in getting better, if they don't see it as any kind of problem whatsoever, you as a thinking partner or a friend or a coach or a mentor are giving him this feedback and he's not internalizing it. That's interesting.
What you said right there, Scott, is another one of the traits that if somebody asked me, what are some of the traits of being a great leader? I think curiosity is incredibly
Yes.
important, right up there with learning.
And curiosity about I'm not getting the results I want. Curiosity about the team isn't where it should be yet. Curiosity about, gosh, I haven't figured out how to motivate Damon. I'm not there yet. What I've tried isn't working. And again, rather than kind of like those things shift us into that self-serving bias really easily. It becomes about you, Damon. You're not good enough. You're not motivatable. Um, and it's a difficult for me to get curious about it and say, okay, what am I not bringing to the table? What what is it that I'm doing that's yielding these results? What could I try differently to see if I spend a little more time with Damon, truly build a relationship, maybe coach him through the process, really show him, be a little bit more detailed in how this needs to be done? Will I get a different result then? Well, maybe. And it's hard for me to see that sometimes, what I own in the dysfunction or what I own in not getting the results we want.
That comes back to humility, I think.
Damon, you had that coach somewhere along the way where like you all were the problem. You're not trying hard enough.
Mhm.
You're not doing it. And again, that coach couldn't see like, look, hey man, everyone's miserable. You're a horrible human being. You don't like people. You don't like coaching people. You're just in this role for some reason. We can't really quite figure it out. And that person couldn't see how they were part of the problem. You know what I mean?
Well,
You had that
I
coach.
I couldn't agree more. I
Yeah.
had a situation with I played for 3 Hall of Fame great baseball coaches. I was so fortunate. It really helped me model my leadership. I had another coach who doesn't matter who it is, but he's a big league manager now. And,
Yeah.
when things went well, they took all the credit, but when things didn't go well, they pushed all the blame onto the team. And that was one of the things that I always looked at and said, "I'm never gonna lead that way," right? Because that first of all, it doesn't make you feel good, doesn't make you feel motivated, and second of all, I don't know, be having a victim mentality, I don't know many great leaders, who have that, lack accountability, lack ownership when it comes to being successful.
Yeah, and it's probably really difficult for that individual to kind of look at what they need to own in the dysfunction or not getting the results we want. There's how their style is potentially contributing to not achieving what we potentially could have achieved, right? And then you have these wizards like a Phil Jackson or a John Wooden who, Bobby Knight probably struggled to for many years see how he was part of the dysfunction. He probably struggled sometimes. Now, a John Wooden or a Phil Jackson, you've got these individuals, they called him the Wizard of Westwood, right? And he was this really interesting character who could have very high standards, push you hard, and get a lot out of his players, but do it in a way where they loved him. They know that he cared about them. And I think he was a very self-reflective guy as well. He was a very self-aware guy. If you read some of his work, he was constantly, like, back to your word, curious about how we get better, how we do this work. And yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. It really is.
And if you look at the John Woodens and Phil Jacksons and, they weren't necessarily the best at playing basketball themselves. I
Ding,
mean,
ding, ding.
not even close, right? And then you take a guy like, let's say, Ted Williams, who is an awful manager. Well, I shouldn't say awful, but what struggled at managing. And I think a lot of that comes down to maybe lacking empathy a little bit, right? Because you don't understand why others can't do what you're doing.
Back to where we were kind of having a conversation. Just because I'm Michael Jordan doesn't mean I'm going to be able to teach others that. Have the
Absolutely.
patience to do that work. And again, if you've watched The Last Dance, he
Loved it.
was a puzzle himself.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? What is it? Damon, you know more about this than I do. Like a lot of catchers move on to be managers. Talk a little bit about that. Now I'm flipping the script.
I love it. Yeah.
Why would that role lend itself to being a big league manager?
I
Do you have
think
a
it's because they see the whole field.
Okay.
Joe Torre, Joe Girard, they see the whole field and they're kind of navigating everything and directing. And Scott, they tend to be, from my baseball career, they tend to be stronger communicators.
Wow.
And so that's why I think that they fall into that role and become sometimes better leaders because of communication and seeing the whole field. They see the bigger picture.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's cool. That's really cool, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they've spent their year communicating, making sure that they're communicating clearly, strategizing. I mean,
Because they're strategizing all day long because they're calling the pitches.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times they're working with the coach to navigate where the team should be out in the outfield. So that's why I think catchers have become great leaders. But one of the things that I know that you're really big on, as far as getting things done, is influence, right? I mean, it's having the influence to do it. So I know that you say that influence is the heart of leadership. Why do you believe so?
Okay, so gosh, well, one definition of leadership would be the process of influencing others toward a common vision. The process of influencing others toward a common vision. Now, that could be influencing your child to be potty trained. That could be
Thank you. Thank you. We talked about that beforehand. My wife will kill me for bringing that up.
Well, but it's real. I mean, it's very real. It's right now, my daughters don't have the grade they want in mathematics. So the process of influencing others toward a common vision. So my wife and I are actively influencing our girls to prioritize mathematics in a different way. We don't want to have to take away the iPad. We don't have to yell and scream, blah, blah, blah. We want to influence them. It's easier to do it that way than it is to like pull the authority card.
Right.
Now, in leadership, you're influencing your senior leaders, you're influencing colleagues, you're influencing subordinates, you're influencing clients to move in a certain direction, or when it comes to business development, that is all influence. I don't have authority over you to give me the business. I'm influencing in those meetings where I'm trying to earn your business. So influence is at the heart of the work. And can I create a setting in a situation where the 7 people around the table truly feel committed, not just complying? I don't want just bodies at the table, but they truly feel committed to the path that we're moving in. They're excited about the path we're moving in. And if you're able to do that, if you're able to be that individual who's unleashing that energy, who is facilitating that into existence, you're really, really, really good. So I think there's a difference between having a position of authority and influencing others to work above and beyond. All the research suggests that one of the core ways leaders influence others is through relationship. And again, if you think about some of the best teachers you had along the way, some of the best coaches you had along the way, some of the best leaders and managers you had, they were probably fairly good at building authentic relationships. You knew they cared. You knew they had your best interest at heart. And then oftentimes, at least the research suggests, we will work above and beyond for those individuals.
God, is it because they know that we care about them or they trust us? I mean, I agree with you. Like relationships, a lot of times is the glue that holds everything together.
Yes.
And so what is it? Is it in your opinion?
So Covey said, trust is the currency of business. I think you could say trust is the currency of leadership. You could say that Again, if it's about building a strong relationship, then if you and I are in relationship, I have to, for it to really be authentic and real, I have to have a level of trust with you. And once I have that, I am willing to go above and beyond for you. Again, if I have poor character, if I'm an individual who doesn't really like people, but this is the next step I had to take, if I'm not skilled in actually leading others, that can all diminish trust. But are you known as an individual who builds trusting relationships? If you are, that's a very powerful source of influence. Now, there's this really cool topic called influence tactics.
Uh-huh.
Gentlemen from down in your neck of the woods when you were playing in college, Robert Cialdini wrote about influence, right?
I'm a huge fan. Huge
Yes.
fan of
Yeah.
his.
So prefluence, influence. I mean, he's studied this topic for years, and you have this other really cool kind of body of literature about what are called influence tactics. So maybe one influence tactic is that I use logic. Well, in the realm of human affairs, logic doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, but not always. So you have these influence tactics. We could say, you could go on ChatGPT right now and you could say, hey, what are 20 influence tactics? It'll list them out. And then you could say, hey, I'm trying to influence my child to be potty trained. Which of these influence tactics could I try? What experiments could I run? And ChatGPT will give you ideas. So these influence tactics are things like building a coalition. That's one option. Using logic. That's an option. If 3 of us are in a meeting trying to influence you and we're using logic, and maybe we're a little bit excited about the idea, so we kind of use our energy, we use positive energy plus logic plus a coalition, it's more likely that you are going to pay attention to that as the decision maker than if it's just me kind of offhand saying, hey, I think we could probably do this. That's not a well-designed influence attempt. So you have to design your influence attempts. You have all these influence tactics as options. And sometimes it might be an inspirational appeal. Sometimes it might be an appeal to the relationship. Sometimes it might be logic. Sometimes it might be a coalition. Sometimes it might be that I am going to kind of paint a picture of how we get a win-win. Like,
Mhm.
I know what you need. You know what I need. We can both win if we move in this direction. Sometimes when people are making and designing influence attempts, they're just thinking about what they want. But if I go to my employer and say, look, I'd love to get the certificate on data analytics, it could really impact the organization because of this, this, and this. And I will bring it back and bring it to our department. And this might actually alleviate this pain that I know you're feeling right now. Well, that's a totally different influence attempt than, hey, could I go do this certificate? It's $5,000.
Right.
So influence, it's a whole world. And if you're leading others, this is one of those topics that, gosh, I mean, and again, you lit up when I said Cialdini. For listeners, read some Cialdini, read the book Influence.
I read both of them. I recommend them to everybody, to our listeners.
Yeah.
One area that I like both personally and professionally when he talks about persuasion
Yeah.
is knowing when to ask for something.
Yeah.
You know?
Timing, right?
I mean, timing, right? If I want to get a hall pass to go to the movies with my buddies, I'm not going to do it after my wife's had a tough day. I'm not going to just jump in and say, "Hey, honey, can I go to the movies?" And the same thing goes, I think, with that work. If I want to go to my boss and ask for an opportunity to try something or take a $5,000 class, it's not going to be right the day after our quarterly numbers come in and things are poor, right? It's having the forethought of when to maybe engage in a conversation.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. Timing, location. Sometimes if I get you out of the office and we're actually having lunch and we're having a real dialogue, and it's not in the kind of the hustle and bustle of inside the organization, and you can actually focus on me, timing, location. I mean, all of those are considerations. It's so much fun. It really is. But what we see is a lot of people are doing it poorly because they don't even know what they don't know. They didn't learn it in dental school or in architecture school. And now they're being asked to do it. And again, it's like, asking me to go do architecture. Well, I'll build some really bad buildings for a long. I'll learn eventually. I'll learn, but it's going to be a little bit of a, you know,
What is the difference really in, let's say, when it comes to influence of like what you can learn in a classroom versus what actually needs to be applied in the real world? Because I'm sure there's a lot of great theoretical things, but then you got to actually be able to apply it in the real world. So how does somebody who's read a bunch of books, taken a bunch of classes, get better at applying it, especially around influence in the real world?
Okay. Can I go back to baseball for a sec? Can I geek out for a moment? Do we have time?
You have to, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let's say we want to create a world-class baseball player. Okay.
Mhm.
According to the literature, according to the learning literature, this is learning science. There's 5 kind of basic, they're called orientations of learning. That's a fancy way of just saying approaches to learning. So, do I have the knowledge, the skill, the mentors, the self-awareness, and the experience? Okay. I could give you the technical words for all of those: cognitivism, behaviorism. Um, but those are 5 ways of knowing, 5 ways of learning. So you could put me in a classroom and teach me about baseball, and I could learn a lot of statistics. I could learn theory. I could learn the game that way, but I'm not going to be a baseball player at the end of that. I will be someone who knows a lot about baseball. That's the Achilles heel of leader development, is that we're sitting in a room talking about it,
Mhm.
and there's no practice field per se where we're actually getting real-time coaching. Technology, simulations, that's going to be kind of fun, holodeck type things. We're going into some cool stuff. But behaviorism is the skill. Do I actually have the skill? So if I want to create a baseball player, do whatever position they're playing, do they have the thousands of little tiny skills that have been stacked to create a larger skill to create great technique that is going to be more likely to succeed? So do I have the knowledge? Do I have the skill? Have I had the mentors and the coaches? You had some great coaches along the way, and that's a good thing because that was the best of the best. And if you have access to that coaching, that's a benefit. So have you had the mentors and the coaches? The experience. I could give you great knowledge in the classroom. We could do a ton of skill building. I could give you a great coach, but if you've played no games, you're going to go out on the field and get destroyed. That's a whole nother type of learning, being in the moment, in that pressure moment when it's all on the line and it's you. That's a different type of learning. So that experience piece of all of this, critical. And then there's that kind of personal domain. How do I respond under pressure? How do I respond under fear? How do I deal with the stress of, so all 5 of those are important parts of the learning. You could put me, the experience alone doesn't do it. That 10,000 hours stuff is BS, because you could put me on a baseball field or you could put me on a golf course and I'll play 10,000 hours, but I'll build a lot of bad habits unless I have some of the theory, the skill building, and the
I
mentors.
couldn't
So
agree with you more on that. I could
I
not
might
agree with you more
improve.
on that.
I might improve, yes, but I'm going to build some bad habits and eventually I'm going to stall at a certain point and I'm not going to get anywhere else. So when it comes to developing leaders, the Achilles heel is that a lot of it is done people and organizations doing it, like practicing golf without a lot of mentors, actual theory, or actual skill building. They're just in organizations doing it right now as we speak. Just whatever you get, and they're learning, hopefully. Or you have people sitting in classrooms learning the theory. Some of the faith-based organizations, they do a pretty good job of that personal domain. Student affairs organizations and colleges do, what are your values? Are you a person of character? Are you emotionally intelligent? Sometimes those organizations do a pretty good job of that domain. No one has locked in the skill building space. No one has combined all 5 of these, and you need all 5. And go to a surgeon. You want the surgeon that's done it like 1,000 times with high quality scores. They know that you don't want the person where they're like, yeah, this is my 2nd time doing the gallbladder. No.
Same with pilots, right? You don't want somebody who's
Yes.
passed. Here's the thing: you don't want somebody who's passed all certification and has 10 hours flight, but you also don't want somebody who's got thousands of hours flying but don't have any of the certifications. You need both, right? I mean,
You need all 5 of those domains, those orientations. And then again, if it doesn't matter if it's judo, baseball, surgeon, leader, do you have an individual with the theory, the knowledge,
Mhm.
skill, the experience, the mentors and coaches so that they're getting feedback, and that self-awareness, that kind of I'm centered in myself. I'm a person of character, I'm mature, I'm self-aware, right?
Yeah, one thing I would add to that from a organizational perspective, I talk a lot about it. I'm sure you probably do about learning organizations,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
that's like. So you have to have all those, but inside your organization, if you want to build great leaders, you got to have psychological safety in the respect for you take, what you learn in the classroom and skills and everything, and then give them the opportunity, maybe you could speak to a little bit about being able to apply this and
Yep.
allow people to fail. Now, it's a little different when it comes to being a surgeon or a pilot, right? But wouldn't you agree that people need the opportunity to put it in practice and learn from failures and feedback and everything that goes along with it?
Well, with the pilot, that's why you have a flight simulator.
Yeah.
And with surgeons, I mean, they have simulators as well in different ways, but I know that that's why we have like Annie. If I'm teaching you CPR, that's kind of a version of a simulator, right? So, yes, 100%. If I'm in a context where failure, where speaking up and sharing my perspective is not welcomed, if failure is not welcomed, you have an organization where there's a lot of fear, then I'm going to stay safe. I'm going to stay quiet. I'm not going to put myself out there. And in many ways, we're going to stay stuck
Mhm.
because, and so, yes, I mean, think of the number of times you failed as a player. Think of the number of times I've failed as a parent. I think the the key here is, yes, am I in an environment where I can do that work and I can learn? We're not talking about like Amy Edmondson talks about intelligent failure, fail small, fail fast, learn, capture the learning, move forward. Um, but yeah, there's I couldn't agree more. The context matters. The waters you're swimming in matters greatly. And if you're with someone who isn't supportive, if you have coaches and mentors around you who are not supportive, it's hard. It's a hard place to be.
But another thing that I've heard you talk about, which I think is really fascinating and I'd like you to explain, is thinking partners.
Okay, so this is another one of those foundational things, I think. So, am I a person of character? Am I curious and a learner, lifelong, just learning as a way of being, always learning? Am I an individual who's trying to be as self-aware as possible? I mean, am I good at building relationships? And I think I had a guy on my podcast, he used the phrase ethics is a team sport. And that was a really interesting phrasing. But I think leadership is a team sport. Who is
Mhm.
on your team helping you make sense of some of the stuff swirling around you? That could be a coach, that could be a therapist, that could be maybe it's your faith, maybe it's just a really good friend or a mentor. Who are your thinking partners? Because I think a lot of times leaders are put into these very complex situations and it can feel really lonely. And who do they turn to? Often, I mean, not for the answers, quote unquote, but to help them make sense of, okay, what are my options here? What are the considerations I need to have on my radar? Because some of the stuff they're facing is so incredibly complex. So who are those individuals that you can turn to that in a very productive way? These aren't people you can bitch to or complain to. These are people that are helping you make sense of and helping you problem solve some of these really complex adaptive challenges that your organization is facing. They don't have answers, but they're individuals who can share their perspective and you trust it.
What I've found is that the higher you go up in the ladder, and let's say as a CEO, I'm the CEO of a small business. There are certain things that I don't want to turn to my team to discuss, and obviously my wife might get tired of hearing about it after all these years. So it gets lonely
Yeah.
as a senior leader.
If that's all bumbling around in your head, and I mean, that can be a really hard place to be. So at least for me, for some people, it might be journaling. For some people, it's their faith. For some people, it's meditation. Ray Dalio kind of famously talks about how meditation just really, that practice of 2 times a day, he said it was a game changer for him. Great. That hasn't necessarily, I've meditated, but it hasn't been a game changer for me. The
It's
game
hard.
changer for me is I have a therapist, I have a mentor, and I have my wife. And those 3 people are thinking partners for me to help me make sense of what's swirling on around me as I'm building a business like you, like,
Mhm.
and my kids are just about getting to college age, and that's an important time for me to actually be building a business.
Yeah.
Don't mess it up now, right? As I've left academia full time. And so, yes, I mean, I think having those individuals in our lives is essential. It has to be prioritized.
How is a thinking partner different than a mentor?
I think it could be a mentor. I think it could be a therapist, it could be a mentor, it could be a really good friend, it could be a former colleague that knows you well. I mean, I don't kind of like, it could be a faith leader,
Mhm.
but this is someone that you can speak with, that you trust them, you know them, they're gonna give you wise counsel. And, again, they don't have the answer per se, but they're gonna help you process. When I was making the decision of leaving academia full time, I had a job for life, full professor.
Mhm.
I was at an institution like USF in your neck of the woods, where a Jesuit institution, job for life, but I wasn't feeling challenged. I knew there was more for me to explore. I talked with a couple colleagues who made the leap. I talked to 3 of my mentors that I had taught with, but I just really respected their opinions. I spoke with my wife for about 2 years before making the decision, therapist, mentor. So I had all these individuals that kind of, this is figuratively, this is weird phrasing, but kind of held me through that process of like, okay, should I make this decision? And that was invaluable. If I'd let that just kind of continue to bumble around up in my head, that would have been a harder place to be for me, at least. Now, again, for some listeners, it might be a gratitude journal or journaling that would help them. I think for each one of us, it's, who cares what the process is? Meditation, journaling, your faith, close relationships, therapist, coach. Just make sure you have it. That's the bottom line. Whatever it is that works for
If I'm a listener right now and I'm thinking like, yeah, I love this idea about thinking partners because I do. You know,
you. Yeah.
where do you think they should start to go out and find? Um, because you want to be selective, right? So, what advice you have to if I wanted to build my bench of thinking partners, where would be the first place somebody would start?
There's probably 2 or 3 folks in your sphere that you just haven't thought of them this way yet. So again, it could be a former colleague that retired and you just always really admired them. They were just always like super wise, but because they're not in your sphere any longer, you just forgot, oh, geez, I should reach out to Jim and ask him to go play some golf or go have a beer or have a cup of coffee. He always said really wise things. And I always respected kind of how he held himself. So there's likely people in your sphere that you could turn to in the first place. So are you thinking about people in that way of wise counsel? But again, it kind of depends on your resources, and for some people, it's a coach. They find a coach. Do you have a certified coach that you could turn to? Um, for some people, I think it could be a therapist. So maybe it could be your dad. You know what? I always loved my dad was always super wise, but I just haven't thought of dad in that way lately. But we
Yeah,
go fishing and I say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this. What do you think?" For some people listening right now, their dad would be the perfect person to
yeah,
have that conversation with. I do some work with, or I've had on the podcast a few people who have these retreats where they take senior level executives who go on some of these retreats and spend just a little bit of time pausing, getting on the balcony, looking around. I mean, maybe it's an event like that. I think for listeners, I would always be willing to I can name some organizations and some outlets that might serve, but my guess and my hunch is that there's people in your sphere doing this work who you trust, who you could turn to even ask. that you could say, hey, I'm looking for someone who's led and built a business that you just really respect, who's a person of character, and you've known them for years and you trust them. Do you have someone in your sphere like that? There's probably some names that will pop up. Now, I don't want to underestimate this. It takes some time to find
Mhm.
these people. I've kind of collected some of these folks. I've been with Phil, my therapist, for 17 years.
Wow,
So
really?
yeah, it takes time sometimes to find these people that, but I think if you always have an eye out for who, and for some, I mean, I don't know about you, but I have one friend where really his purpose is finances. And I don't mean that in a kind of a totally utilitarian way. I don't just always use them for that, but I will talk to Martin before I make a big financial decision because I just really trust his wisdom and his mind when it comes to that topic. Now, I'm not going to him for some other things. When I was making the transition, I didn't speak with Martin. But so I've kind of collected some of those people who offer wise counsel over the years, and I've just always had an eye out for that. Like, oh, this person's a wizard when it comes to X. That's the type of parent I would totally want to be, right? So those are those individuals. Like, again, some close friends of ours who are going through the college search right now. Okay, mentor us. What do we need to have on our radar? You all have raised 3 awesome children. They're incredible. They went to awesome schools. Tell us the secret sauce.
Yeah. What I
Right?
what I hear you saying, which I think is important, is you wanna it takes time to build your thinking partners,
Yep.
and, you don't need to go for 'em for everything, right? So, maybe you go to Mark for finances, you go to somebody else around maybe even questions about parenting, who
Transition.
knows, right?
Transition.
Transition,
Yep.
and but I also think it's key that you find people who will give it to you straight,
Yes.
that who aren't just gonna agree with you or tell you what you wanna hear, but that's why I love it. It's like, I have a couple friends who will be like, "No, Damon, you're wrong." You know what I mean? And they'll come to it, because you don't need, yes men, so to speak, for it.
Yeah, these aren't like drinking buddies and just kinda like tell you what you wanna hear. I mean, these are serious conversations of like, "Look, I'm considering this, I'm thinking about this, I'm struggling with this. I have this employee. I don't know if they're the right fit. I've tried this, this, and this. What else should I be thinking about? I failed here. I probably own this part of the problem, that self-serving bias.
Mhm.
What are my options?" And just having someone who like it's they aren't so close to it. At times they can identify paths forward. They can provide some wisdom that because you're so close to it, it's hard for you to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I did exactly that a year ago. Somebody who I had probably held on way too long. I called up one of my friends who I guess you could consider my thinking partner, and I
Yeah.
just, I mean, he didn't know the person, doesn't even really learn it that well, but he gave me phenomenal, phenomenal advice. Scott, look, I could probably talk to you for hours. I mean, there's so many other topics that we haven't even talked about that I wanted to discuss with you. Is there anything else around the topics that we've spoke about, that you want to share with the audience?
My favorite quote about leadership is, "Who you are is how you lead." And I overuse it. I say it every time I can, but that quote matters. Who you are is how you lead. That is your personality. That's your knowledge about leadership. That's your skill level. That is um, any number of other your values, any number of like components that make up you as a human being, your maturity level, your lived experience. So who you are matters. If others are in your care, then who you are is very, very important. And are you the best possible version of yourself for those people? They could be your employees. One thing I love about that quote, I think you could say who you are is how you parent, who you are is how you coach, who you are is how you partner. And we know what it feels like to be in the presence of someone who's not well or who they are is not their best selves in this moment. You talked about a couple of those coaches. And I think we owe it to others. If we choose to lead, we owe it to others to do that work so that if again, 70% of how I experience the organization is your skill level, your knowledge about leadership, your maturity, your personality, who you are matters greatly. And so I leave listeners with that. And that comes back to curiosity, learning about yourself, the topic, and just making that a priority. If you're leading others, is that a priority for you? It kind of has to be, in my opinion.
One thing I want to say on that before we wrap up is I've always felt that way. If I'm going to take on the responsibility to be a parent or run an organization that has, 60, 70 people, I owe it to them to be the best that I can be through learning, through having integrity, through all of that. So that is a wonderful quote and a way to think. So today, I mean, look, we've talked about the research behind leadership. We talked about influence, building thinking partners, some of the key traits when it comes to learning, and so much more. I know that you've got a great podcast called Practical Wisdom for Leaders, right? So our audience needs to absolutely check out your podcast. Where else do you want our listeners to connect you with?
I think the best place two places, LinkedIn. I'm writing about leadership on every day. I'm posting on LinkedIn, 8:30 a.m. Eastern. I'm really kind of been getting into this practice of doing that each and every day, and some kind of tidbit about. So again, if you want to systematize your learning, if you want a little bite-sized thing to be thinking about each and every day, well, that's a great way. Who are some people you can follow? Maybe some of your thinking partners aren't even, people that you interact with. You just want their wisdom. You go to Seth Godin's blog or something every day. Whatever it is, how are you learning? So LinkedIn is a great place. And then scottjallen.net. That's where I live on the web. So those are two great ways.
Good. So listeners, do me a favor, go to Scott's LinkedIn page, and then on the right-hand side, there's a little bell. If you click on that bell and select relevant post, he'll pop up in your feed over and over again. So that's great. And then do me a favor, rate and review this episode if you got any value out of it, which couldn't imagine you wouldn't. And until next time, everybody, I always like to say, Scott, stay curious, keep learning, and have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
The way people learn is more through non-directive coaching, is we ask questions and we get them to think about this. And